So, I mean, my name is Kabiru, like I said, and I work with NubianVR, and we make games, but games primarily for learning and training. Um, I don't know, where do we start from? Let's start from you, my friend. I'm wanna starting from here because I know her very well.
We are doing that, it's like going against tradition.
Oh, really?
Right first and ladies first.
Oh, no. Okay. So I'll start from the back.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes.
Valentina.
Nice to meet you. Okay. Valentina, what do you do? Are you a student? Are you? Okay. Awesome. 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 Okay. Um,
I'm Felix.
Felix?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm into education.
Okay. You're into education. Good to hear. We have lots in common. My friend?
My name is Echo.
Echo. Okay.
Like,
Awesome. What kind of?
my forte, I would say, is networking.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Anybody else who is into like networking here? Oh, okay. My friend?
Okay, my name is Andy.
Andy.
Yeah, project management.
Awesome. All right.
Emino.
Abigail?
Emino.
Eminel. Okay. A student. Okay. What are you studying?
I'm just computer design.
Okay. Okay. My friend?
I'm going.
Gwen. Okay.
I system.
IT. Awesome. 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 My friend? Yes. Isaac. Awesome. Okay. Right. Ooh. Awesome. I think you should speak to her. But anyways, I think we have a good amount of people here, so I think we can start. So just as a reintroduction, my name is Kabiru Seidu, and co-founder of NubianVR and also program director at Nubian Foundation. NubianVR is an interactive product company. So primarily we develop interactive products for mobile, web, and also virtual reality. And primarily most of our applications are designed for learning and training. So just to deconstruct what interactivity is, I mean, most of you, how many of you play games here? Okay. Wow. Joshua, I'm I'm disappointed. Not anymore. Okay. Okay. So for those of you, but you are? Oh, okay. We understand. We understand. But I mean, since you guys are familiar with games, then you're also familiar with what interactivity is. So broadly speaking, interactive systems are systems that require inputs, like immediate interactions with the system for you to be able to engage with it. So games are a very typical example. If you're playing Mario, for example, Mario is not going to move unless you press a button. Mario is not going to jump unless you press a button. And if you press the wrong button, you can also result to Mario falling in a hole or Mario dying. So a system like that is called an interactive system, and it has lots of applications for learning. But then today, the primary interactive system we'll be focusing on would be virtual reality. And we will be looking at how virtual reality simulations can actually help train African farmers to prepare them to be able to feed the world. I think you guys are already familiar with me. But then just a basic introduction into virtual reality. So simply put, how many of you here are familiar with virtual reality? Okay. Okay. So for those of you not familiar with it, simply put, virtual reality is a three-dimensional environment that is generated by computer images. So primarily, I mean, to access a virtual reality environment or to access a virtual reality simulation, you would have to put on a device on your head. It obscures your eyes, so like you can see over here, and essentially it renders another three-dimensional world around you. And with that three-dimensional world, you can engage with it the same way you would engage with icons on your phone or objects on your computer screen. You can actually engage with them similarly. So you can have pointers to engage. Like, for example, I wanted to see that photo frame much closer. I would just point to it, and most of the time you would have interactions that allows you to be able to actually see it a little bit much more close or interact with it in other ways. So simply put, that's what virtual reality is. But then today, the reason why we are interested in virtual reality is because we want to explore the promises that it does have for agriculture. Agriculture, as we know, I mean, it's almost as old as lots of human societies. So humans invented agriculture about 12,000 years ago, and it dramatically changed the way our societies were, because we transitioned from just having a society where we used to roam around as like hunter-gatherers to actually start creating settlements because of agriculture. There was no way we were able to do that without having enough food. The reason why we moved around before was to look for food, but with agriculture, it kind of like put the control of food in our hands. So agriculture generally has been pretty much growing. At the beginning of the 1900s, essentially we had about 1.6 billion people on the planet, and we had to use, the same resources that we have today to actually be able to feed those 1.6 billion people. Today we're 8 billion people on the planet. It's actually going to be 9.7 billion in 2050, and the size of the earth hasn't changed in any way. So what that means is that agriculture is actually taking a whole lot of toll on our environment. So right now we know that 80% of deforestation is caused by agriculture. We know that 70% of our planet's water usage is actually consumed by agriculture. And we know that agriculture is a significant contributor to water pollution, as well as also the loss of biodiversity. So just because we rely so much on pesticides and weedicides, we find ourselves in a place where lots of those eventually seep off to water bodies and eventually affect biodiversity. And I mean, in Africa, this is it's a problem we have to be very concerned about for several reasons. 65% of the remaining global arable land is actually situated here in Africa. In 2010, we had about 50% of our population being employed by agriculture. But today, we're actually seeing a decline in that number. On the continent, I think right now we're at a place where we've lost about 7 percentage points of people saying, okay, I mean, agriculture does not seem to have enough opportunity for me, so I would find a career elsewhere. But then these are very, very critical challenges. Just for people not familiar with agriculture, what arable land means are land that are available primarily for agriculture. So on the planet right now, 65% of those lands are actually in Africa. So that puts lots of responsibility on us to be able to find a much more sustainable way to farming, given that we know that farming takes a heavy toll on the environment. So I'm sure by now you guys are wondering, okay, farming takes a lot of toll on the environment. What's the solution? One of the solutions that has been, lots of climate smart agriculturists have actually pushed out is what we call greenhouse farming. I don't know if you guys are familiar with greenhouse farming. How many people? Show of hands. Awesome. Okay. So greenhouse farming offers like lots of opportunity to be able to actually increase your agricultural yield without necessarily increasing the space of your land. So right now, for a farmer who is growing on a 1 acre piece of land, if they wanted to increase their productivity, for most farmers on the continent, given that they rely on open field farming. What that means is that they would need to physically go into their farm and actually extend the size of their land, which would mean slashing down trees, which would mean, cutting down trees and, stuff like that. Um, so, I mean, there needs to be a way in which we can subvert all of this. So, greenhouse farming offers a way in which we can use less lands for farming. It also offers a way in which we can reduce our dependencies on pesticides and weedicides. Because you're growing in a controlled environment, you have very little need for, pesticides and weedicide. But at the same time, too, as well, it introduces technology, which I think is an incentive for lots of young people to be able to actually say, okay, you know what, we would engage with this modern way of farming. But there is a problem, even with the greenhouses. So the challenge with greenhouses is that, so in Ghana, for example, there's no shortage of like people who started out on greenhouse. For you to be able to simulate different kinds of environments. So one solution to solve the skills gap that we have in greenhouse farming is actually training people in virtual reality. So the idea behind that is to be able to train people. One, for several, there are several reasons why greenhouse is the ideal place, and virtual reality is the ideal place to train people about greenhouse farming. And the first reason is that it reduces the time. So currently, as it is, if you wanted to actually learn how to grow in a greenhouse, you would need to go through a training that is almost about 16 weeks and a minimum. Because for you to be, a self-respecting greenhouse farmer, at least in some sense, you should have been able to go through one full farming cycle of whatever crop it is you're growing. If that's a vegetable plant, that will take you a minimum of 16 weeks to be able to start, to be able to have gone through from seedling stage all the way to our fruiting stage. So that's quite some time. So for people who have, who are already existing farmers, like to imagine that they would take this much time off their farm to actually go learn how to grow in the greenhouse, I think is a bit of a stretch. So in virtual reality, essentially we can condense, the training from about 16 weeks to under 12 hours of training. And the reason why we're able to do this is because we're able to fast track some of the interventions that happens in the greenhouse. So for example, if you went into your greenhouse and you realized that you had a pest, say whiteflies, and you made some kind of intervention, you said, okay, let me use neem oil to be able to actually repel the pest. What you will find out is that it will probably take about 2 to 3 days before you start to see any kind of immediate results. And for a student who is, eager to actually learn the whole process, that would take so much time. But in a VR simulation, in a simulator, you're actually able to fast track all of these kinds of interactions. So I apply pesticide, I wait for, almost instantaneously, I can see the impact of what that intervention has. Secondly, too, as well, virtual reality offers a contextual environment for people to be able to actually learn how to farm in greenhouses. So if we were to use the platforms preceding this, so if we were to use a computer, for example, what you would have to do would be to abstract
all what it is you want to teach into a 2D screen in a way that, for someone who has, which is a whole lot of the farming demographic, for someone who has little literacy skills, for someone who has little digital skills too as well, you find out that that would be a very, very challenging user interface to maneuver. But in VR, essentially what you're doing is that, particularly by relying on new ways of engaging with computers, sort of like gestures, you are able to actually have people. The farmer already is familiar with digging a hole, is familiar with taking a stroke. Like they know how to use their hands. So by creating a virtual reality environment that allows users to be able to use their hands to interact with space, by that same way, you are also increasing the prospect of farmers with very limited education and digital literacy to be able to engage with the simulation, with the training. I've mentioned this before, youth tend to gravitate towards technology. So I think this is a very exciting way to actually draw them towards technology. And finally, last but not least, so for those who I told you were, I mentioned in Ghana, for example, there's no shortage of greenhouse farmers who abandon their greenhouses. That's largely because they probably had to fail. Learn to grow in a greenhouse by actually growing in a greenhouse. That's a whole lot of challenge to actually try to do. So by creating a safe space in virtual reality where people can actually learn to grow a tomato plant all the way from the seed to a mature plant, essentially we're able to give them a safe space where if they fail, it would have zero effect on their livelihood. So we've spoken a lot about this simulation. So I think it's also important for us to also conceptualize what really this simulation is, and what exactly it is we're trying to simulate. So primarily, the major thing which we would be simulating are divided into about 5 different categories. So we would be simulating the plant genetics, we would be simulating the environmental conditions too as well. We would be simulating pests and diseases. Just to go back to the top, so for plant genetics, for example, different plants have different kinds of resistance, different plants have different kinds of temperature sensitivity, different plants have different shape, different flavors, and depending on how you grow them too as well, you can also affect all of this. For the environmental conditions, things like light, temperature, air quality, nutrients of the soil, salinity, pH level, and also the composition of the soil, all affect how your plants will grow. So essentially in our greenhouse environment, you're able to take a seed which has the store of your plant's genetics, what the plant shape is, what kind of temperature it requires to be able to germinate, what kind of temperature it requires to be able to fruit to its maximum potential. You are able to actually have that start off with that seed, and by regulating the different environmental conditions, by dealing with pests and diseases when they attack, and also by being able to mixing all of this with features like accessibility that allows you to be able to engage with the simulation through your hands, but also voice too as well. Essentially, we are able to create an environment that allows people to learn how to grow in a greenhouse. Here, just a few visuals on what the system looks like. So the way it works in 2 ways. So the first is a lesson mode, and the way it works is that it tries to walk you through different processes. How to nurse your first plant, how to be able to make your plant start fruit, what to do when your plant starts flowering, what to do when your plant starts fruiting. All of those will be broken down into different modules that allows you to be able to engage with this lesson. But it's also going to have like an open sandbox where essentially you can go over there and you can put different plants in the ground to start growing. You can also prune your plants. You can essentially just engage with the plants in a way that you can actually mimic the way they behave in real life. This is more on the lessons, and generally the structure of a lesson would be one that includes, you know, a little bit of video, video lesson to be able to just convey the core message of whatever activity that the person is intended to learn in the greenhouse. So, for example, this is the case of planting cherry tomatoes. So the person would watch a video that shows them how to do that, and then they would be given an activity to solve. So after watching, you know, what you need to do to be able to nurse your tomatoes, you are then now able to actually physical step by step go and actually nurse your own tomato. And all of that will also have its own assessment to be able to just gauge the level of understanding that we have. Yes, we will also have, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, video will be a very big part of it. Video would be the primary way to be able to like convey information. But then one of the things to us that is really critical is language adaptations to us, well, to be able to have a situation where a farmer with limited digital skills and literacy skills is actually able to watch a video in his own or her own local language that allows the contents to come much more closer to them. So yeah, I think each lesson would have a range of objectives depending on what the tasks are, and based on that, people are able to gradually, step by step, learn how to do it. Yeah, each plant would have, you know, its own different kinds of metrics that allows you to gauge, okay, I mean, what's the humidity, what are the different parameters that are affecting the growth. So that's the end of my presentation. I think I'm ready to answer questions that you may have, but primarily I'm happy to share this idea with you guys.
Thank you very much. So, are there any questions for the VR center?
Yes. I prefer to sit.
Please.
I think it's a very good presentation. My question is, with this greenhouse, it's not very organized. Is your system able to, let's say, a scenario, I want to plant a queen, and we all know
Yes.
because of it. Okay, so is your system able to simulate conditions that I'm supposed to provide a greenhouse such that I'll be able to, do a performing plan?
Yes, it is able to. So all of those would be encapsulated. So right now, the current version that is being built is designed for the tomato plants. So it's designed for you to actually grow a tomato plant from seed all the way to a fruiting plant. But then it's absolutely possible for you to design this for other kinds of crops too. So for other vegetables, but then other tree crops.
So currently it's just
For now, yes.
okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, I'd like to know, is the virtual reality already in?
Yes, in development. Yes, it is.
It's in development, but we don't have it yet.
I mean,
Working like
a demo of it.
a
Yes.
demo.
Yes, there is a demo of it.
There is a demo.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a target market for it?
So primarily the folks who are into building construction of greenhouses. So your Dizengoff, your Agri Impact. There are also a few other players in the space who are actually training people on greenhouse farming too as well. So the idea is really to bring them on board to be able to actually use this as a way to cut down the amount of training time that we will have.
So how far is your reach? And also, have you show this to the government and how it can boost agriculture in the country?
Not yet. So in terms of reach, I mean, we're still yet to start reaching farmers because it's still in development. So the idea really would be to get it to a point, and we would definitely need more research to be able to actually start scaling it aggressively. But then the idea behind it is really to start working with our greenhouse providers to just see that, okay, we've been able to figure out, okay, the curriculum of it, it's possible to actually train people in this and for them to actually gain knowledge out of it. There needs to be a research process around that. So after that process is now when we would actively start. I mean, we're happy to engage government now if you are available, but the primary idea is really to be able to take it research process and be able to start scaling.
Thank you. I would like to know, how do I get started with VR development?
Awesome. Wow, okay. So for greenhouse, for VR development, I think there's several ways to get started. It depends on where you really want to start from. But typically, most people who start VR development start on the Unity route. So there's a game engine called Unity 3D, and it allows you to be able to create virtual reality environments across different platforms. But there are other tools too as well, Unreal Engine and a couple of other tools too. Yeah. Yes, Joshua.
Great presentation. Do you think the future of agriculture in Africa, greenhouse will be a solution to that? Is that yes?
Yes.
Okay, then if yes, can we grow stuff like plantain, cassava in greenhouse?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no limit to the scale of a greenhouse you can build because the principles are still exactly the same. In fact, I actually do think that we need to start building more greenhouses because that's the only way something like this can actually work. Because right now, as it is, if you wanted to buy a greenhouse, it would be costing you something that costs around $10,000, and that's largely because a lot of people import the technology. But in terms of the principles of how it works, are very, common knowledge, and you can actually, with the right tools, you can actually build them. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like growing plantain, you just need to create a different kind of.
What about cash crops?
Cash crops.
Cocoa and coconut.
It's still possible, but I would say, I mean, the competitive advantage at this point in time would probably be for vegetable crops, and also trying new varieties of fruit crops as well. So things like strawberries, blueberries, that normally we have lots of importation dependency on them. Even tomatoes also, a lot of tomato comes from Burkina. I don't know how, like Ghana seems to have more fertile land than Burkina Faso, but for some reason, I mean, a lot of tomato comes from there as opposed to here. But then we can also cut down on that dependency by being able to just support our vegetable production using greenhouses.
Maybe one addition, what I think that greenhouse also has could be beneficial for us, considering the scale of the land that we use. So you can build up.
That's true. Let's go farm this too.
People forget that building up help us save more nature,
That's
more
true.
and preserve the environment more adequately. So, in my view, that's a very great benefit to invest in greenhouse.
Absolutely.
For the sake of nature, or only already.
Absolutely. And even if you were using the same, how do I call it? The same size of land in a greenhouse and in an open field, you can actually get more yield than in an open field because you are giving the plant exactly what it is it needs. Yes, please.
So just a couple of questions.
Yes.
You said somebody has growing apples in
Yes, Bokwasi.
Bokwasi
Yes.
in a greenhouse.
No, not in a greenhouse.
Outside.
Yes, outside.
Apples grow in Ghana outside.
Yes. So they are called Bambugu apples.
So
what's
sorry, yeah, you were saying.
It's called Bambugu apples.
Okay.
So they were brought in from Kenya.
Okay.
Yeah, and they do grow here.
They're similar to normal apples.
Yes, they are similar to normal.
They're just
I know
a species
the
of
variety
apples. I
Yes,
guess.
the variety they have are normally red. I haven't seen the green of it, but they grow apples.
Are they the only people that grow apples in Ghana?
I think they are the only ones I know. I know of, but I think I've heard of a couple of other people who grow apples here.
I'm sorry, this is a tangent.
Yes.
Do people grow strawberries in Ghana?
Not in Ghana, but people grow strawberries in Nigeria. I know.
So we don't, and you can grow strawberries in a greenhouse,
Yes, you can.
but nobody is growing strawberries in a greenhouse
No.
because it's not profitable to them, I guess.
Well, I mean, so several things. I don't really think it's about profitability more than it's about skill and accessibility of inputs, for example.
So you need the seeds and all of
Yes,
that,
you need the
and then you
seeds.
need a person who's going to be able to
Pretty much.
properly grow.
Yes, all of that. You need that skill set.
Okay. You said the greenhouse is about $10,000.
Yes.
About what size?
So if you're looking at, say, like a 300 square meter.
That's what the size of this room, bigger,
The
twice.
300 square meter probably, yes, it's more rectangular, so
But
probably a
about
little bit like this room and slightly bigger.
okay.
Yeah.
So
So I did 300 square meter of taking, say, about 600 plants.
of what? Of like
So ideally, most of the time they would say use tomato as the basis.
tomato. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I think. Thank you.
It's cool. You know, find out what is the difference if you are to do in a greenhouse and cooking field. How
In terms of yield,
yes.
So-
Comparative.
yes.
Yes.
In terms of yield, like some people are actually recording about 120% increase in yield. And this is without like any additional enhancers in the sense of like people claim they can actually increase that even further by being able to use things like biochar to grow tomatoes. But generally, I think ideally, conservatively, you can expect more than 50% more of what it is you will get on the open field for the same space of land. And it's for very obvious reasons. So for one, I mean, if you're growing in a greenhouse, you're growing in a controlled environment. If you're growing in a greenhouse, and if you're growing in a controlled environment, what that means is that your plant expends less of its energy in trying to fight diseases and pests because you have a reduced amount of them. Or in open field, you're very much subject to whatever is out there in the world. Yes.
Please, I have this question.
Please.
It looks like most of the things you're talking about are in the positive aspect. I want to know, there's certain negative effects with this approach because I want to know because although the yield and everything may be alright, but don't you think it will also have some sort of impact on the environment? Although we are talking about the fact that it reduces certain things from the environment, but don't you think it would definitely have some sort of impact when it comes to the environment? Yes. So I want to know.
Maybe what kind of
Maybe a tradition.
Biodiversity.
How about the product, the quality as well? Maybe to have that aspect as well.
so the nutritional value of the product?
Yeah, all those things.
So when you say nutritional value, I'm a little bit like, what are you? Because you're not adding the quality of the produce.
Yeah, the quality of the produce.
I think it's nutritional wise. I haven't actually researched that, but generally, I mean, most plants have very similar nutritional values. So for vegetable plants and stuff, I don't think by going in the greenhouse you're having diminished values. If anything, I would probably say you're having much more nutritional value because your plant, like I said, is not going through so much stress, so it's getting lots of the nutrition that you need. Yes,
I
Joe?
also think it's more organic. Greenhouses are mostly organic. They don't apply chemicals and all that.
Yes.
It's highly nutritious and okay.
that's true to us as well, because your typical open field farming, I mean, is just rained upon with different kinds of like pesticides that just washes off and it's kind of like going into water bodies.
Just to be sure, are you saying that with the greenhouses, they don't use any kind of chemical?
It depends. I mean, so it depends on farmer to farmer. So like when I was growing in my greenhouse, like the idea was that I wanted to go as organic as possible. So if I had like white flies or stuff like that, I would use say neem oil. But then the challenge is that over time, by repeating the same pesticide, most of the plants, most of the pests start getting resistant to it. Yeah. So you're normally advised to switch it up a little bit. And if you don't have other organic substitutes, you may have to rely a little bit on chemical fertilizer. But then more, I can definitely tell you with lots of certainty that you're growing in a greenhouse just because you don't have your crops exposed to all of the elements. Your dependence on pesticides and weeds pretty much.
I have one question, and more a step back to VR, because let's say what I also find very interesting. Seemingly, there's a basis to the likelihood of reflecting reality.
Yeah.
What is the data that you use to have that simulation?
I'm not sure I'm fully.
You must be using the data to actually reproduce the effect that if you put seed oil in it, it will have certain effects. So what is the basis of the data that you use to make it likely to match reality?
Yeah, so there are lots of like plant growth models that are available. So for different plants, so currently what we are working with is that for tomato plants, and even for tomato plants too. So like each seed would have a certain level of variation. So the goal over here is really not to be able to teach someone one-to-one mapping of exactly what it is that they are to do in their farm. What we are trying to do is really to be able to help them build the mental aptitude to be able to know what to do in the case of any kind of challenge. So for example, I go into my farm, I observe white flies. And white flies, has a certain, it starts, affecting the plant's growth in terms of nutrients. So the plant will start feeling a little bit stumped and then you will start getting care of the stuff like that. As a farmer, if you step into your farm and you see and you have such a problem, the sooner you're able to spot it, the quicker you're able to actually, resolve it, and the more you're able. So essentially, the simulator really is just supposed to create that space where people see we have a pest infestation. This is what to do, or if I can't even do this, maybe I should consult someone else. But then generally, it's just to give them some kind of mind map of how to be able to, interact with things in the greenhouse. Yeah. So,
you're getting the tools to manage it.
Exactly. And also the tools to be observant, because as a farmer, there are lots of stuff happening around you. So it's very important for you to be able to pay attention to what's in, because if you notice a white fly very early enough, it stops it from spreading, it stops it from, exacerbating. Yes.
There are so many questions. Maybe
bunch them together.
No, and also to round up a bit, but I think this can be a whole different workshop. Likewise, I love the enthusiasm. So, but it's also for you, but you can.
Absolutely, I'm happy to answer the questions. Yes. Okay, 1, 2.
Shall we make the last 4? Let's make it 4 questions, then we can round up as well. Also for the timeline.
Well, I'm losing my counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You've asked 1 question before, so. Okay, 5. I think 5 is a good number.
It's okay.
Alright.
Okay, so I like to ask that this received enough sunlight. That's the first one. And the other one is, should we patronize the VR? Would there be after purchase consulting?
Okay.
Yeah. These two questions already.
Sorry.
We don't mind.
Okay. So in terms of sunlight, yes, by growing in the greenhouse, it gets equal amount of sunlight. You just need to position it well. So for example, if you position the greenhouse in between this building and the other building, you will not get the full spectrum of sunshine because when the sun has moved past overhead, you are not able to get lots of sunshine inside. But then I don't really think it's so much of a challenge, but ideally, I think it's best for you to grow on a space that would have ample amount of sunshine. My greenhouse, it was in between the wall of my compound and also the main building. And it was 3 by 5, about 15 square meters. And I would say it received a good amount of sunshine, even though during some times of the day, the shadow of the building will cast upon it. But generally, I think it's fine. And in terms of what does that look like to you? Because right now, for us, the people who we're speaking to about this are people who are into greenhouse manufacturing and who already offer training. So what we're selling to them is shorter amount of shorter training time. So if an individual wants to get into us, well, by all means, we will guide them through the process of how to use the simulation. But as much as possible, as we think through the design of the simulation, we're trying to make it very, very. We know the demographic of most farmers have very low literacy and very low digital skills. So we want to have a system that can kind of meet them where they are at. Yeah. Yes.
So I was encouraged until you mentioned the price.
Okay. So the price of the greenhouse.
And I was wondering if this can wait.
Okay. So it's totally different. So for people who, and actually for most people who want to go into greenhouse farming, I actually encourage them to build it locally because most of the greenhouses that are imported into Ghana are designed for temperate climates. So what that means is that in Europe, for example,
Netherlands is a beautiful country.
Yeah. In Europe, for example, what you're trying to do is actually keeping a little bit of heat within the greenhouse. But over here, that's not what you're trying to do. You're actually trying to reduce the amount of heat that's inside the greenhouse. So the material choice is different. The amount of netting that you use as well is different. So importing the greenhouse, I don't think that should be anyone's. That is not the way in which we scale greenhouse locally. We need to build capacity to build it. It's very. Joshua and his team, they build more complicated stuff than greenhouses. What we are talking about right now are passive greenhouses. There's also the opportunity of actually automating those greenhouses. So I don't think it's a challenge for us to be able to build it locally and use it, and based off of that, we would be able to reduce the margins. For the same greenhouse that we're getting a quote of about $10,000 for, there are people over here that can give you that same size for $25,000, $30,000 cities. And I would actually even say that's probably a little bit too big of a greenhouse for someone to start with. So if you're able to kind of reduce the size of the greenhouse, you can also commensurately reduce the cost of how much you would take to grow it. But building locally, building with improvised materials too as well. So things like bamboo, for example. My greenhouse was built with bamboo, and it worked fine. The only challenge was in Ghana we don't really have a proper process for treating bamboo. So over time we started having termites kind of attacking the wood. But generally, in places like Bali, in places where the bamboo is a very big part of the architecture, they have very good processes for treating them. And if you have a greenhouse made out of bamboo, it can last as long as that made out of steel.
Third question.
Okay, my question is, looking at the educational background of the VR,
Yes.
yeah, how long is it going to be with the average Ghanaian farmer who is willing to enter into it?
Okay. So when we were designing this tool as well, we were not trying to get too ahead of ourselves. So even though we would be having the virtual reality simulation, we would also be having a follow-on in-person practical learning how to use a greenhouse to be able to marry the knowledge that they got in VR to what actually exists in an actual physical greenhouse. But then just given that we've been able to give them the basics in virtual reality, there are lots of other things which we can kind of like draw from. So in terms of timing, like I said, we're looking at having a simulation to teach someone about tomato plants in under 12 hours. And we are also looking at, but that probably is not going to be how do I put it? It's not, you're not going to experience all of that in one sitting. So however long it takes you to do that, I think ideally, if you were doing, say, maybe making a progress of like, 30 minutes a day, stuff like that, probably take about 2 weeks to complete. But at the same time too as well, the in-person training too as well will take a little time. So from our training, we're looking at being able to cut down the whole process to somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks as compared to 16 weeks.
There was a gentleman who asked a question behind, and he was saying that is it really economically and not environmentally better than the farming? Does it have negative aspects? So I wanted to do like a bit of a thought experiment. So if let's say this greenhouses become the major way for agriculture in Africa,
yeah,
and this becomes the main thing that we're doing. Everybody's greenhouse farming. All the farmers who are currently farming in open farms are currently greenhouse farming. Do you think it will be a net positive or net negative in terms of what it does for the environment compared to what's happening now?
I think it's absolutely going to be a net positive, and that is why we are pushing this agenda. At the same time, too, as well, growing in greenhouses reduces our reliance on chemical weedicides and pesticides. So what that does is that we have little amount of pollution going into our water bodies, and we have little loss of biodiversity. So I'm very convinced that there would definitely be a net positive. But then at the same time too as well, it's not something you can think of in isolation. So in terms of like, we know things like steel do have, so most commercial greenhouses right now are made out of steel. And we know steel does have an impact on the environment. So what we need to be thinking about is how might we be able to have alternatives. So things like bamboo, for example, how might we be able to use that in place of things like steel. So I think we just have to be creative, but then generally I think we're moving towards a future where we want agriculture to be much more environmentally friendly. I think greenhouses are a very big part of that equation.
So you said this and how much does it cost?
No, we haven't. So for this particular, so for NubianVR, we have for the product, but then for the greenhouse simulator, it's still very much in development. So we are currently just working with partners to be able to get it to a point where we can actually meet the needs of our greenhouses for the first time or already existing greenhouses.
The quick one.
Okay, you're the last one.
Please, are you looking for investors for amount like to invest to extend?
Yes, we are looking for investors, but then we just want the investors to be able to understand the process and of what it would take to be able to get this to market. The picture is here behind that, but we are looking for investors.
Any skill set as well?
Skill set, yes. I mean, for talents to build is yes. If I didn't mention this before, interactive technology has like one of the longest pipelines in terms of just being able to build any kind of interactive product, particularly if it's for learning. So for example, before we put out any product, it needs to be touched by someone who has skills in instructional design, someone who is actually a teacher or a learner. It has to go through someone who has skills in 3D modeling, 2D illustration, someone UI UX, then someone who is actually a game developer. And if none of this is actually, if it's running on the web or mobile, you also need the mobile and web development. So the skill set needs are very, very broad. And yes, by all means, we are looking for people to jump on this.
Well, then I have a last question. Where can they find you?
Wow, okay. I think the easiest place to find me will probably be on LinkedIn. So Kabiru Seidu, you can find me Kabiru Seidu on LinkedIn. NubianVR to us, you can find us on www.nubianvr.com.
That's quite straightforward.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the best way to find me.
Well, everyone, give an amazing applause for